There were also some officers.
Some investigators for the DA's office?
Yes.
All right. Did you ever see the DA, Mr. Gilgarcetti? He
Yes.
popped his head in also, too?
He put his head in the door once.
He came in, too, didn't he?
Yes.
All right. And this meeting started at what time?
Sustain. Phrase question.
This conference, were you all together?
Sustain.
When you all got together, what time was it?
I think it was approximately 5:45.
And that get-together lasted how long?
Approximately an hour and 15 minutes.
And you finished at what time?
Approximately 7 o'clock.
And did you come back again this morning, have some further conversation?
Yes, I did.
And what time did you get back here this morning?
7:30.
7:30 a.m.?
Yes.
And now, first, let's back up for a moment. In the hour and 15-minute meeting that you had last night, whose office was that in?
Mr. Darden's?
And so, were there any other DAs, deputy DAs, you can tell us about who were present, other than the ones you've told us? Mr. Wooden, Bill Hodgman, the district attorney himself stuck his head in. Anybody else you can recall?
I don't remember all their names. There were people in the hallway.
People all around?
People all around.
Okay. Did you see this gentleman here, somewhere
Yes.
around? And this gentleman, for the record, his name's Scott Gordon. You saw him around?
Yes.
Did you see the lady in the middle, Miss Marsha Clark, anywhere around?
I saw her walk by the hallway. She didn't come in the office.
All right. And there were other people, you just don't know their names, is that correct?
I just don't remember their names.
Okay, I understand, Mr. Rubin. And then you returned this morning by prearrangement, I presume, at 7:30 a.m., is that correct?
That's correct.
And where did you go where'd you talk and meet this morning?
In Mr. Darden's office.
All right, and the meeting started at 7:30?
Yes, it did.
And tell us who was present at 7:30 this morning when you started that meeting.
Mr. Darden, Mr. Hodgman, this gentleman here.
Mr. Scott Gordon?
Yes. Primarily it.
All right, anybody else come in during that meeting?
Mike Stevens.
Mr. Mike Stevens is one of the district attorney's senior investigators?
Yes.
All right.
I think Tom Lang came in.
Tom, LAPD
Yes.
Detective Tom Lang?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else that you recall?
There were some other people passing back and forth, but I don't remember their names.
And that meeting started at 7:30, and how long did it last?
Until about 8:45.
So right before court.
Yes,
So again, you met then about another hour and 15 minutes more.
that's correct.
And during that time, you talked about your testimony that you'll be giving here today. Is that correct, sir?
No,
All right, you didn't talk about your testimony at all?
not at all.
You didn't discuss what questions Mr. Darden had typed up to ask you?
Oh, you mean today's testimony?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we discussed today's testimony.
All right, you talked about today's testimony.
Yes,
That's one of the reasons you were having that meeting, wasn't it?
correct.
All right. He told you what he was going to be asking you. Isn't that correct?
Yes,
All right, sir. Now, then you came down here to court shortly before 9 o'clock. Is that correct?
that's correct.
Took a stand. All right. And you were told, were you not, that you were going to be asked to
Excuse me, counsel.
Yes, sir.
Is there something going on we need to know about back there? All right. Proceed, Mr. Cochran. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem, Your Honor. No problem. You were told during the course of these two meetings of an hour and 15 minutes length each that you'd be asked some questions about the golf clubs. Is that correct? Items 1053, I guess A, B, and C.
It was mentioned that that might occur.
All right. So you were aware of that. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, sir. Now, let's go back for a moment. And with regard to the two gloves that you have tried on for us, and you shared with us you'd worked for a period of time prior to 1990 for Aris. And when you left, you were vice president of some kind. Is that correct?
I was vice president and general manager of Aris Isotoner when I left.
All right. And those gloves, when they were made between the period we talked about, 1982 to 1992, were they in some way shrink-proof?
No,
Did they have some kind of treatment to keep them from shrinking
no,
in the manufacture? Not at all?
not at all.
And so if a person then bought gloves, presumably to wear in the winter in the eastern part of the United States, it would be anticipated those gloves would get wet. Isn't that correct?
It
Wouldn't
could happen on
anticipate?
occasion.
All right. On occasion, they become wet, is that right? And with regard to that leather, is that one reason why the fat liquor became a part of the process in preparing these gloves?
That's correct.
And the reason why the fat liquor was used was to diminish the amount of shrinkage, is that correct?
It was more so to have the leather retain its memory and create an elastic capability versus the shrinkage.
All right, so elastic capability, which means that it can stretch, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, so that if gloves, sir, and these gloves cost a lot of money, didn't they? They were beyond the $20 average you told us about, leather gloves.
That's correct.
Is that right? So if you bought a pair of gloves in the winter of '90 and they got wet, you put them away, you expect to be able to use those gloves again in the winter of '91. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And your product, you don't make a product that just because they get wet or have some precipitation, that you throw them away at the end of each use. They're not usable gloves. They're not one-time usable gloves, are they?
They are not disposable.
All right. These gloves are to last a long time. That's one of the things you pride yourself on. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And they're made in such a fashion so they are supposed to be elastic and they come back for use. Isn't that correct, sir?
That's correct.
Now, are you, as an expert, do you know, assume hypothetically, these gloves were purchased in 1989 or 1990. And let's assume they were worn during the winter, during that time, rain and snow. You can't tell this jury how much those gloves shrunk during that period of time, can you?
I cannot.
You have no way of knowing that, do you?
I have no way of knowing how much liquid or rain or snow or whatever, elements went onto the product and actually how they were dried.
Right. So you have no way of knowing that.
I do not.
It would be rank speculation again, wouldn't it, if you told us that, wouldn't it?
I wouldn't speculate on something like that.
You wouldn't even do that, would you?
No, I would not.
And those gloves that we've been talking about, the two gloves, item number 9, LAPD number, I think, and item number 77, those gloves are, especially one of them is used. It has some, it's worn in the palm area, isn't it?
That's correct.
There's like a hole or something in that palm area, isn't that correct?
It appears that way.
All right. And so that indicates to you that those gloves have been used over a period of time, isn't that correct?
Yes, it does.
And so you can't tell us anything about the history of those gloves from 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, whatever, can you?
No, I cannot.
Right. Now, with regard to any liquid that you said you saw on these gloves now, you have not and you do not and cannot measure any liquid that may or may not be on those gloves, can you?
I don't have that capability.
All right, I understand that. And so when you've given us these estimates of the size of these gloves or whatever, that's just your best estimate, is that correct, regarding these gloves?
After trying them on?
Yeah, I'm trying them on. It's your best estimate?
Excuse me?
Your best estimate?
It's my estimate based upon my experience of, in the manufacturing process, I would continually try on all production of all sizes to check quality control.
I understand that. You also told us this morning and also yesterday that your gloves were manufactured in such a way that whether a person was a medium or large or an extra large, they should be able to fit the same glove. Did you say that?
What I said specifically was that a person with a size large to extra large hand could get a size medium glove on his hand. That would not be, it would not be comfortable, but it would actually stretch enough to possibly go over his hand. That's what I said.
That's because the gloves have elasticity, isn't that correct?
Especially at the initial point of purchase.
Uh-huh. So that if those gloves now are large, under your scenario, someone should be able to fit those on. Isn't that correct? Who was an extra large?
No. These gloves have actually decreased in size due to the amount of fat liquor that has been absorbed by certain liquids. So these gloves can never get back to the original size at this point in this specific condition.
And you have made that judgment by looking at them. Is that correct? Regarding the fat liquor?
I have made the judgment by putting the glove on, comparing it to what I would normally compare a size large or extra large, and the glove is now closer to a large than it was an extra large initially. And I am going on the assumption that it was clearly, truly an extra large when it was produced.
And that's the assumption because you saw an extra large tab in there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And that could have been wrong in the first place, couldn't it?
Well, in this particular glove, it's not wrong because inside the glove, when the lining was torn away, I did see the XL stamping that I mentioned yesterday, along with the other markings.
Well, that's assumed that was right at the time it was made at the factory, isn't it?
That's correct.
You have no way of knowing. You weren't there when it was made, were you?
I spent an awful lot of time there, but I would definitely not want to commit that I was there when these gloves were made.
I don't think you would you? All right, so you're just relying upon whatever insignias they're in. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
All right. Now, with regard to these gloves, under your scenario then, these gloves have elasticity. Is that correct?
Yes, they do.
And you tried them on yourself. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And you tried them on yesterday at a break where Mr. Shapiro and I and you and Mr. Darden stood at this table and tried on those gloves. Isn't that correct?
That's incorrect. I never tried on these gloves. I never put on the latex gloves. All I did was look at the gloves.
All right. You looked at them, but I'm saying you saw us try them on.
Yes.
I mean, you stood there and watched, right? You stood there in this courtroom, saw Mr. Shapiro and I both try on those gloves with latex gloves on our hands. Did you see that?
That's correct.
And you and the lady who testified before you, Ms. Vimich, stood here and watched that. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
All right. And the first time you've actually tried the gloves on is today. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And all the time, and you saw and observed these gloves, didn't you? Yesterday? You saw those gloves yesterday? You got to answer out loud, sir.
Yes.
All right. And had you seen them before that time?
In person, no.
Yes. Had you seen pictures of them before?
Yes, I had.
And you, in fact, you'd given a report to the district attorneys. Isn't that correct? You'd been interviewed regarding...
Over the telephone, yes.
Right. You'd been interviewed regarding your observations?
Yes.
All right. And at no time ever prior to the demonstration of Mr. Simpson yesterday before this jury, you never talked to him about any shrinkage, had you?
Shrinkage was discussed, yes.
You talked to shrinkage? You talked to Mr. Darden about shrinkage?
Overruled.
No. You talked to Mr. Darden about shrinkage?
We discussed the possibility of shrinkage to a slight degree and that the gloves could be refurbished close to original size depending upon the amount of, I didn't get into the technical details with him, but we were aware that the gloves had been saturated with something and not reworked or reconditioned for almost a year.
All right. Now, when was that conversation? Is that yes or no? When was that conversation?
Prior to I believe that it actually occurred here in the courtroom when we were looking at the gloves, and for the first time we saw how crumpled they were and how short the fingers appeared.
That was yesterday. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. But when you testified yesterday, before Mr. Simpson was asked to put on those gloves, you never testified about any shrinkage, did you?
I was never asked about any shrinkage.
Can you answer my question? You never testified about any shrinkage, did you?
No, I didn't.
All right. And today's the first time you ever talked about shrinkage in connection to this case in court. Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. And did you talk about that last night in the meeting that you had upstairs where District Attorney Mr. Garcetti stuck his head in the door? Did you talk about that at that time?
Yes.
Did you talk about that this morning?
Yes.
We had the hour and 15-minute meeting this morning
Yes.
with the parties. Now, you testified briefly about this aspect of taking gloves off and how you take gloves off. Recall being asked a question about that?
I do not.
All right, well, let me ask you this. When gloves are on tight, they're generally removed by pulling the fingers off. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And that's kind of an accepted manner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because if you pull, like from the vent, they'll basically turn inside out. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
From the V. They'll turn inside out, right? All right. These gloves that we've been talking about were specifically ordered for the winter. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they were.
Like we talked yesterday, I think, about the fact these gloves were ordered in August, and then there was maybe another shipment that came maybe in October.
September, October, November.
And that was in anticipation of cold weather. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
That's one reason why they're lined. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And it's anticipated then these gloves would go through weather and precipitation and rain and all kind of things they have back east that we don't have out here.
That's correct.
You described that with regard to the sizing of these gloves that your company, at least by the time before you left, did make an extra, extra large.
That's correct.
And you described something about the fact that that was perhaps 1% of the population, is that correct?
Less than 1%.
All right, and you know, 1% of the population right now would be about 2 million people, isn't that correct? 200 million Americans?
2.6.
Okay, well, even more than 2.6 million. It's a lot of people, isn't it? You can't say yes or no, is that a lot of people?
2.6 million people is a lot of people, but we were only selling men's gloves.
All right.
So
Well, you think there are many, well, let me see how I can phrase this. You haven't seen many women who bought extra large gloves, have you? Extra large? Have you?
very rare.
That is rare. Most of the people or the individuals who purchase extra large gloves are what?
Two different scenarios.
Well, I'm asking, are they male or female is the question.
Male.
They're male. All right. Have you seen athletes? Have you dealt much with athletes?
Yes, I have.
And you've seen some pretty large people, athletes,
Yes, I have.
who can't buy their clothes off the rack. They usually are tailored. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They sometimes have very large appendages. You've noticed that, have you?
Yes.
Are you a basketball fan?
Yes.
And have you recently seen the size of the shoes of Shaquille O'Neal?
Yes, I have.
22 something or other. And so you know that there are athletes who have these large appendages. You understand that, don't you?
Yes.
May I have just a second here? Mr. Rubin, just a few more questions. Are you aware of how much 3 cc's of liquid amounts to?
No, I'm not. Excuse me, 3 cc's?
Yes.
Yes, I'm very familiar with 3 cc's.
All right. And do you think that, I want you to see my arguendo, that 3 cc's of liquid is on those 2 gloves? Do you think that amount of liquid would result in your gloves, your very expensive Aris gloves, shrinking 10 to 15%?
Oh, well,
3 cc's of liquid would have no effect whatsoever on those gloves.
So if there's testimony that there's only 3 cc's of liquid on those gloves, it should have no effect at all. They should be exactly the same size. Is that correct? I'm asking.
oh, well,
Is that right?
That's correct.
All right. One last question. With regard to Aris, the Aris, and Mr. Darden kept saying isotoner. Did you tell us yesterday that it wasn't isotoner? These are Aris Light.
Isotoner was a different product line than leather gloves. These are Aris Leather Light gloves.
Do you know whether or not the style number 70263 for Aris Light was made for Christian Dior in addition to Bloomingdale's, so that Christian Dior may have also sold these gloves during that same period of time we've been talking about?
That was absolutely impossible because Aris Isotoner was the licensee of Christian Dior and assigned different styles numbers to Christian Dior product. Aris Isotoner was the distributor of Christian Dior.
They were. All right, so my question is it possible that Christian Dior distributed or sold the style number 70263.
Impossible.
That's absolutely impossible.
Absolutely impossible.
Could not have happened.
Could not have happened.
All right. Thank you very much for staying over. Good evening.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Rubin, thank you very much, sir. Counsel, you asked to reopen on this. Isn't there an end to this at some point?
Yes, there is, Your Honor. I'd ask for 10 minutes of the court's time.
Proceed.
Mr. Rubin, with regard to the conversations you and I had last night and this morning, and you discussed the nature of some of those conversations here this morning, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Well, this morning, were you shown some gloves?
Yes.
And who brought those gloves to you?
I believe that they,
Improper beyond the scope of
Oral.
I believe that there was a package of gloves on the floor when I arrived.
Were they in a box?
Yes, they were.
Were each of the gloves in bags, just like the bag marked 164A?
Yes, yes,
Did it have writing on it?
yes.
How many gloves were there contained in those boxes?
With the court reporter, please. All right, thank you very much, counsel. Mr. Darden, would you conclude, please?
Thank you, Your Honor. What did we do in my office this morning in addition to talking about your testimony?
We looked at some other gloves that were on the floor in bags.
Okay. And were there other men present in the room?
Yes, they were.
Did you look at the size of the hands of those men?
Yes, I did.
Overruled.
And were there men in the room who had hands larger than the defendants?
Sustain. Sustain. Yes. We're close. We're close.
In response to Mr. Cochran's questions, you testified that the appropriate way to pull off a tight pair of gloves is by the fingers?
The appropriate way to take off any glove would be by the fingers first.
Okay. And what do you do after fingers first? How do you get them off?
Just pull them down and they gradually would slide off.
Okay. Well, would you pull them down by the fingers and then pull them off the palm of your hand?
That's leading suggestion. He's asking object leading suggestion.
Overruled.
I believe what you would do, most people would do, if they were right-handed, they would always start with their left hand. They would pull down the pinky finger approximately ½ inch to an inch, pull down 2 or 3 fingers, have enough material to just pull the glove off.
Okay. Now, you testified that the CXL is a cadet extra large glove?
Yes.
Okay. And does that mean that the fingers in the glove are smaller than normal?
Slightly shorter at the end.
You also said that the crime scene gloves from Rockingham and Bundy both have some degree of elasticity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But they've lost some of that elasticity. Is that right?
Rephrase the question.
Have they lost any of the elasticity?
Yes, they have.
And when you were in my office last night, did you also look at some videotape?
Various videotapes, yes.
Videotape of the defendant?
Yes.
Did you see him put on the latex gloves yesterday?
Sustained. Sustained.
Well, did we talk about the videotape?
Yes, we did.
Did we talk about the demonstration
What demonstration?
yesterday, the defendant putting
Yes.
the gloves on?
Yes, we did.
Did you note any irregularity? We'll strike that.
Overruled. At this point, I haven't heard a question. It's been withdrawn.
And did we talk about the effect latex might have on putting a pair of gloves on?
Has.
When you say that a pair of tight gloves should properly be pulled off at the fingers, does it matter which hand you use?
Overruled.
If you have a glove on your left hand, does it matter? Well, you'd have to use your right hand to pull a glove off. Is that right?
Yes, you would.
Okay, but someone else could pull that glove off, couldn't they?
Overruled.
Yes, they could.
And if the defendant had on a glove, a tight glove, and was in a struggle with Ron Goldman, and that glove came off, that could be because Goldman pulled at his fingers. Is that correct?
Sustained. Sustained.
At any event, a tight glove can be pulled off a hand rather
Yes.
easily. Rather easily. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Now, when you spoke with us in my office yesterday, you spoke primarily to me.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Other people came in and out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you and I had never met prior to yesterday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You live in New York.
Yes.
Okay. And so to prepare you to testify, I would have to ask you questions, wouldn't I?
Yes, you would.
Overruled.
And that's. Is there any way to find out if somebody knows the answer to a question other than by posing the question to him?
It is.
That's all. Thank you.
Just one or two additional, I want to go home too, and just one.
Yell at him like you yelled at me, Judge.
I'm about to. I'd like to go home too, as would the
And
jury.
with the jury, and with that thought in
All right,
mind,
let's
I want
proceed.
them to go home. Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Thank you very kindly. Have you, you of course talked to Mr. Darden before you took the witness stand yesterday, isn't that correct?
Briefly.
As a trained lawyer, you talked to him before he put you up there. You met him in court here, did you not?
Yes, I did.
In fact, you were sitting out in the hallway talking to David Wooden while the lady was on the stand, Ms. Vimich, isn't that correct? Were you brought in here?
That's correct.
All right. Now, just a couple of questions. With regard to those particular gloves there, you shared with us how one appropriately takes gloves off. Is that correct?
Yes, I have.
And you shared with us, I believe, yesterday that those gloves are designed to fit rather snugly. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when they fit snugly, they don't just fall off, do they?
No, they do not.
They have to be kind of taken off, don't they?
Yes, they
They
would.
use some effort and some energy to take them off, don't you?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin.
Just two questions, Your Honor. The crime scene gloves from Rockingham and Bundy, are they designed to be worn tightly, just like golf gloves?
No, object to performance as well.
You can answer the question.
The fact that they're lined, they are designed to be snug, provide warmth, but not worn exactly like golf gloves, no.
Okay, and you testified a moment ago that it takes a lot of effort to take off a tight pair of gloves. Is that correct?
It would take some effort.
Okay. And
That's two.
an effort consistent with a life and death struggle for one's life, I take it.
Sustained. 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 It's called speculative. Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for coming to testify. You, sir, are excused.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Darden, would you collect the evidence there, please?
witness, or?
Who do you have available? I was asking who the next witness is. Witnesses,
I'm informed that the witness is upstairs. It's Mr. Acosta.
All right.
With our elevator system, it will take 15 minutes to get him down here.
all right, ladies and gentlemen, may have been a short day, but it was interesting. All right. We're going to take our recess for the morning session. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Do not discuss this case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. Have a pleasant weekend. See you Monday morning, 9 a.m. All right? Yes. All right. We're in recess.